Experts warn a magnitude 6 earthquake or higher could happen in our area in the next 50 years. New Madrid, Missouri is home to the New Madrid fault line. A massive earthquake hasn't happened there in quite some time.
There go the lights. 911.
There's a hell of an earthquake, and we've got windows and everything that's falling out. We've got a hell of a dust cloud.
Imagine waking up to the ground trembling beneath you, buildings swaying, and the once calm Mississippi River churning violently. This was the reality for residents near New Madrid, Missouri, during the massive earthquakes of 1811 to 1812. Today, scientists warn that the New Madrid seismic zone could unleash another catastrophic event. But what makes this fault line so unpredictable and potentially devastating?
The New Madrid fault, it runs from St. Louis to Memphis, and this 16 miles long and created 200 years ago by what is still today the most powerful series of earthquakes in American history.
Join us as we explain you why the New Madrid fault 9.0 earthquake is finally about to strike. Nestled in the heart of the United States lies the New Madrid Seismic Zone, NMSZ, a region that has both fascinated and unsettled scientists and residents alike.
The New Madrid Seismic Zone is the most active seismic zone east of the Rocky Mountains.
Stretching approximately 150 miles through parts of southeastern Missouri, northeastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, western Kentucky, and southern Illinois, the NMSZ is renowned for its seismic activity. Unlike the more familiar fault lines along tectonic plate boundaries, the NMSZ is an intraplate seismic zone, meaning it lies within a single tectonic plate, the North American plate. This unique positioning contributes to its enigmatic nature and the challenges in understanding its behavior. Geologically, the NMSZ overlays the ancient Reelfoot Rift, a failed rift system that dates back over 750 million years. This rift was formed during an attempted breakup of the North American plate, which ultimately did not succeed, leaving behind a zone of weakness in the Earth's crust.
As opposed to places like California, where the deep rocks are relatively hot and shattered.
Over time, this area has been reactivated, leading to the seismic activity observed today. The faults within the NMSZ are buried deep beneath thick layers of sediment, making them less apparent than surface faults like California's San Andreas Fault. This hidden nature adds to the complexity of studying and monitoring the zone. Historically, the NMSZ has been the site of significant seismic events. Between December 1811 and February 1812, a series of powerful earthquakes, estimated to be between magnitudes 7.0 and 8.0, struck the region. These quakes were so intense that they reportedly caused the Mississippi River to flow backward temporarily and were felt as far away as the East Coast. The affected area was sparsely populated at the time, which limited the damage and casualties. However, if similar events were to occur today, the impact would be catastrophic, affecting millions across multiple states. In the modern era, the NMSZ remains active, experiencing frequent minor earthquakes. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the region continues to be the most seismically active area east of the Rocky Mountains. While most of these quakes are too small to be felt, they serve as a constant reminder of the underlying seismic potential. Studies have indicated that the NMSZ is capable of producing damaging earthquakes at any time, with estimates suggesting a 7 to 10% chance of a magnitude comparable to the 1811 to 1812 events occurring within the next 50 years. The potential impact of a major earthquake in the NMSZ today is a cause for concern. The region encompasses several major cities, including Memphis, Tennessee, and St. Louis, Missouri, as well as critical infrastructure such as transportation networks and pipelines. A significant seismic event could lead to widespread damage, economic losses, and loss of life. Despite this risk, awareness and preparedness levels vary across the affected states, underscoring the need for continued education and mitigation efforts. Before all that even makes sense, you really need to understand why this fault exists in the first place and how it became such a looming threat. Understanding the New Madrid seismic zone. Unlike the infamous San Andreas Fault, which stretches along the edge of California, the New Madrid Seismic Zone, NMSZ, sits far from the edges of tectonic plates. deep within the North American continent. Running through parts of Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Illinois, this hidden fault system is an anomaly, a so-called intraplate fault, meaning it doesn't lie along the edges of two colliding tectonic plates like most earthquake-prone zones. The new Madrid seismic zone extends roughly 150 miles through the central United States. Though its name comes from the small town of New Madrid, Missouri, its reach spreads far beyond. The fault runs beneath densely populated areas, including Memphis and St. Louis, making its potential impact even more alarming. But why does a fault in the middle of the continent even exist? Geologists believe the NMSZ is the result of an ancient failed rift system, the Reelfoot Rift, that attempted to split North America apart nearly 750 million years ago. Though the rift never succeeded in breaking the continent, the weakened crust left behind remains a zone of instability.
This rock, a couple of hundred years, and seismologists say that's part of the problem.
Over time, this buried fault system has been reactivated by the slow movement of the North American plate, creating the conditions for powerful earthquakes. While most Americans think of earthquakes as a California problem, the new Madrid seismic zone has proven time and time again that the Midwest is far from immune. In fact, some of the most intense earthquakes in U.S. history struck this very region over 2 centuries ago. Scientists today are keeping a close eye on the fault, analyzing its movements, and warning that the next big quake isn't a question of if, but when. But to truly grasp the danger lurking beneath the Midwest, we need to rewind over 2 centuries to a time when the ground beneath the Mississippi River twisted and buckled with terrifying force. The catastrophic events of 1811 to 1812. In the dead of night on December 16, 1811, the residents of New Madrid, Missouri, were jolted awake by an ear-splitting roar. Within seconds, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. Buildings crumbled, trees snapped like matchsticks, and the Mississippi River itself started to flow backward. This was only the beginning. Over the next 3 months, a series of massive earthquakes, some of the strongest ever recorded in the continental U.S., unleashed chaos across the region. At the time, there were no modern seismographs to measure the precise magnitude of these quakes, but based on historical accounts and geological evidence, experts estimate that the largest tremors reached between 7.5 and 8.8 in magnitude. The shaking was so intense that it was reportedly felt as far away as Boston, where church bells rang on their own, and Washington, D.C., where President James Madison was said to have felt the tremors. It wasn't just a few moments of shaking either. This was a relentless series of violent jolts, with aftershocks that lasted for months, some nearly as strong as the initial quakes. The quakes did more than just rattle nerves. They reshaped the very landscape. Entire forests sank into the ground, enormous sand blows erupted from beneath the surface, and massive fissures split open, swallowing anything in their path. The most astonishing phenomenon was the reversal of the Mississippi River. As the ground suddenly uplifted, the river was temporarily forced to flow backward, creating a destructive tsunami-like wave that drowned entire villages and changed the river's course permanently. The force of the quake caused sections of land to rise and fall dramatically, carving out new lakes and destroying others in an instant. What is now Reelfoot Lake in Tennessee was formed entirely by these earthquakes, a living reminder of nature's ability to reshape the world in a matter of seconds. For the people living through this nightmare, the experience was almost beyond comprehension. There was no warning system, no seismic research, and no understanding of what was happening. Only terror. In an era before modern science could explain such disasters, many turned to religion and folklore to make sense of the chaos. Some believed the earthquakes were a divine punishment, a sign of the end times. Indigenous tribes shared stories of a great serpent shaking the land in anger. The Shawnee leader Tecumseh, who had warned of an impending catastrophe just months before, was said to have predicted the disaster as an omen of change. As for the settlers, they were left in sheer panic. Many abandoned their homes, convinced the world was ending. Others stayed and endured weeks of aftershocks that kept them on edge, uncertain if the next one would be their last. Over 2,000 tremors rocked the region in the span of 5 months, turning the Midwest into an unrecognizable wasteland of cracked earth, broken trees, and ruined buildings. And yet, despite all of this, the destruction has largely faded from public memory. The new Madrid earthquakes of 1811 to 1812 are not often discussed, overshadowed by more famous disasters like the San Francisco earthquake of 1906 or the Northridge quake of 1994. But just because the ground has been mostly quiet for the last 2 centuries doesn't mean the danger is gone.
Here go the lights. 911. There's a hell of an earthquake, and we've got windows and everything that have fallen out. We've got a hell of a dust cloud.
In fact, scientists monitoring the new Madrid seismic zone have found unsettling evidence that this ancient fault is far from dormant. Modern seismic activity and recent developments, while there hasn't been another major earthquake like those in 1811 to 1812, the new Madrid seismic zone is still very much alive. Every year, hundreds of small tremors ripple through the region, most too weak for people to feel, but strong enough for seismologists to take seriously. The U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, records around 200 measurable quakes in the area annually, a constant reminder that pressure is still building beneath the surface. What's most concerning is that some of these quakes, though minor, have been occurring in patterns that suggest stress is accumulating along the fault. In 1976, a 5.0 magnitude earthquake struck near New Madrid, a wake-up call that the fault hadn't gone silent. Then, in 1990, earthquake researcher Eben Browning predicted that another massive quake would strike the region, sending residents into a panic. While his prediction didn't come true, the attention it brought to the fault spurred further scientific research, and what geologists found wasn't exactly reassuring. Seismic imaging has revealed that the fault is still shifting, and stress is continuing to build. A study conducted by the Center for Earthquake Research and Information, CERI, at the University of Memphis confirmed that even though there hasn't been a major rupture in over 200 years, the fault has not healed or gone inactive. Instead, deep underground, the plates are still moving, pressing against one another with tremendous force. Adding to the concern, some researchers believe that the region's soft, sediment-heavy ground could make a future earthquake even more destructive.
As we think about where there can be some of the greatest risk.
Unlike the rocky terrain of California, which can help absorb some of the seismic energy, the thick layers of sediment in the Midwest can amplify shaking and spread it over a much larger area. This means that even a moderately strong earthquake could have devastating effects, not just in New Madrid, but in cities like St. Louis, Memphis, and even beyond. There has also been speculation about whether human activity, specifically fracking and deep wastewater injection, could be contributing to increased seismic activity in the region. Studies have shown that these activities have triggered small quakes in other parts of the country, particularly in Oklahoma, where induced seismicity has become a major issue. While the connection to the new Madrid fault remains uncertain, some scientists worry that any additional stress on an already unstable fault line could be a recipe for disaster. The crazy reality is that the new Madrid seismic zone isn't a relic of the past. It's a ticking time bomb. But the real question isn't just about what happened over 2 centuries ago. It's about what could happen if history repeats itself. Except this time, with modern cities, infrastructure, and millions of people living in the region, the consequences could be far more devastating. Potential impact of a magnitude 9.0 earthquake. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake in the new Madrid seismic zone would be an event unlike anything the central United States has ever seen. Unlike the quakes of 1811 to 1812, which are believed to have ranged from 7.5 to 8.8 in magnitude, an event reaching the upper end of the scale would release exponentially more energy. To put it into perspective, each whole number increase on the magnitude scale represents 32 times more energy release. That means a 9.0 earthquake would be more than 20 times stronger than the most violent New Madrid quake in recorded history. The destruction would be widespread and severe. Cities like Memphis, St. Louis, and even Nashville would face catastrophic damage, with buildings collapsing, bridges crumbling, and roadways torn apart. Modern structures built under strict seismic codes might survive, but many older buildings, particularly in historical districts, would likely be reduced to rubble. Unlike the West Coast, where earthquake-resistant construction is standard, much of the Midwest was never designed with the possibility of a major quake in mind. But structural damage is just the beginning. The ground in this region is made up of loose, water-saturated sediments that can amplify seismic waves, making the shaking even more intense. This process, known as liquefaction, would cause the ground to behave like a liquid, swallowing streets, buildings, and anything resting on the surface. Entire neighborhoods could sink, much like they did during the 1811 to 1812 quakes, but on an even larger scale. The Mississippi River, which played a terrifying role in past events, could once again rise and flood surrounding areas, drowning entire communities in the process. Beyond physical destruction, the economic consequences would be staggering. The central U.S. is a major hub for transportation and commerce, with critical highways, railways, and pipelines running directly through the New Madrid region. A 9.0 earthquake would likely destroy sections of major interstates and disrupt rail lines, halting the movement of goods for weeks or even months. The Mississippi River, a key artery for American trade, could become impassable due to collapsed bridges, shifting riverbeds, and damaged levees. Oil and gas pipelines that crisscross the region could rupture, causing fires and explosions, adding yet another layer of disaster. And then, of course, there's the human toll. Millions of people live in areas that would be affected by such a quake, and most of them have never experienced anything close to this level of devastation. Hospitals would be overwhelmed, emergency response teams stretched thin, and power and communication networks would be crippled. In a worst-case scenario, some regions could be left isolated for days or even weeks before help arrives. Unlike California, where residents are accustomed to earthquake drills and preparedness efforts, many Midwestern communities would be caught completely off guard. A disaster of this magnitude wouldn't just be a regional event, it would be a national crisis. The U.S. government, FEMA, and state agencies would struggle to coordinate relief efforts across multiple states. Insurance companies would face historic payouts, potentially leading to economic aftershocks long after the ground stops shaking. Recovery could take years, with some areas permanently altered and others never fully rebuilt. What makes this all the more unsettling is that, unlike hurricanes or tornadoes, earthquakes strike without warning. There would be no countdown, no advance notice, just a sudden violent jolt that changes everything in an instant. And if the sheer destruction wasn't enough to worry about, there's another unsettling truth. Most people in the Midwest aren't prepared for a disaster of this scale. Unlike California, where earthquakes are an accepted part of life, the central U.S. remains largely unready for the kind of devastation a major New Madrid quake would bring. That raises the big question: what can actually be done to mitigate the damage and keep people safe? Preparedness and mitigation efforts. The good news is that scientists, emergency planners, and government agencies are taking the threat seriously. Decades of research and planning have gone into understanding the risks and preparing for worst-case scenarios. The bad news? There's still a long way to go. One of the biggest challenges is infrastructure. Much of the Midwest was built without major earthquakes in mind, meaning roads, bridges, gas lines, and buildings are nowhere near as quake-resistant as those in California or Japan. Strengthening these structures is a slow and expensive process, but some progress has been made. Cities like Memphis and St. Louis have updated building codes to ensure new constructions are more resilient, but the vast majority of older buildings remain vulnerable. Retrofitting an entire region isn't easy, especially when earthquakes are seen as a distant threat rather than an imminent danger. At the federal level, FEMA and the U.S. Geological Survey (USGS) have worked on earthquake preparedness programs to help local communities understand the risks. The Shakeout Earthquake Drill, which started in California, has been extended to include the central U.S., encouraging residents to practice what to do when the shaking starts. Schools, businesses, and emergency services in the region are beginning to adopt basic preparedness strategies, but public awareness is still a major hurdle.
Okay, drop, cover, hold.
Many people simply don't believe a major earthquake could happen in their lifetime, despite all evidence pointing to the contrary. Then there's the issue of emergency response. If a 9.0 earthquake struck today, hospitals would be overwhelmed, highways could be impassable, and emergency teams would be stretched thin. To counter this, states in the New Madrid region have developed mutual aid agreements, allowing them to quickly send resources and personnel across state lines in the event of a disaster. Military and FEMA response plans have also been designed to provide rapid assistance, but even the best laid plans would struggle under the sheer scale of destruction a megaquake could bring. At the individual level, there's a lot that residents can do to protect themselves. Stocking up on emergency supplies, food, water, medical kits, and flashlights can make a huge difference in the aftermath of a quake. Securing heavy furniture, knowing safe spots in the home, and having a family emergency plan can also save lives. The problem, again, is awareness. Unlike in California, where preparedness is drilled into people from an early age, most Midwestern residents have never been taught how to react to an earthquake. There's also the matter of technology. The West Coast has invested heavily in early warning systems, which detect seismic waves and send alerts seconds before shaking begins. While the U.S. government has considered expanding these systems to the central U.S., funding and logistical challenges have slowed progress. Even a few seconds of warning could make a difference, giving people time to take cover, stop driving, or shut off gas lines before disaster strikes. Despite the warnings and preparedness efforts, some might still wonder, how likely is a catastrophic earthquake in an area so far from the edges of tectonic plates? Looking at other major earthquakes that occurred far from plate boundaries can provide a clearer picture of just how real this threat is. Other familiar major earthquakes in intraplate regions. One of the most well-known intraplate earthquakes in recent history struck Bhuj, India, in 2001. With a magnitude of 7.7, the quake devastated the region, killing over 20,000 people and leaving nearly 400,000 homeless. Like the New Madrid fault, the region was not on the edge of a tectonic plate, but rather within the Indian plate itself. The earthquake's intensity was amplified by poorly built structures, and entire villages were reduced to rubble in seconds. The Bhuj disaster serves as a stark reminder that even seemingly stable land can suddenly shift with catastrophic force. Another devastating example occurred in China in 1556. The Shanxi earthquake, estimated to have been an 8.0 magnitude event, remains the deadliest earthquake in recorded history. It struck deep within the Eurasian plate, far from any active plate boundary, yet the destruction was unparalleled. Over 830,000 people lost their lives, mainly due to the collapse of cave dwellings carved into the soft, loose soil. This disaster not only reshaped the land, but also redefined the course of history in the region, proving that even ancient intraplate faults hold immense destructive potential. A more recent case unfolded in the United States in 1886, when Charleston, South Carolina, was rocked by a magnitude 7.0 earthquake. This was another intraplate event, occurring within the North American plate rather than along a plate boundary. The quake caused widespread devastation, leveling buildings and killing dozens of people. The shaking was felt from Florida to New York, demonstrating how earthquakes in the interior of a continent can affect vast areas. What these events make clear is that intraplate earthquakes, while less common than their plate boundary counterparts, are no less dangerous. They tend to affect much larger regions due to the way seismic waves travel through the dense, stable rock of continental interiors. Unlike in California, where frequent small quakes release tension over time, intraplate faults can remain locked for centuries, only to rupture in sudden violent events. The possibility of a devastating New Madrid earthquake is both fascinating and terrifying. What do you think? Are we taking the threat seriously enough? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.